I'm going to ask Vanessa Wilkes now, who's a doctoral researcher from the University of Birmingham, who I think is working with HACT on this project. There's a collaborative relationship between HACT and the Third Sector Research Centre, and she's going to talk about some work that they're doing, very much directed at what many of you yourselves have been saying you're involved in or you're looking at the moment, which is precisely this whole question of how you improve the measurement of the activities which you're doing under this heading of community investment or what have you.
Morning, I'm Vanessa. I'm currently at the University of Birmingham. I'm what's known as a CASE studentship, which means I'm funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, but I've also got an industrial partner, and that partner is the National Housing Federation. So I've been very much working closely with Terry Jones on the neighbourhood audit. First thing to say is when I actually sort of looked at this question, I thought, well, if you can invite me back in about 3 years' time, I might be able to start answering it, because really this covers the whole area that my PhD is about, and I will come on to that in a minute. The other thing to say is that I usually do a double act with Professor David Mullins, who I'm sure some of you know. And he usually covers this initial part of the presentation, because this covers research that he actually did. So if I seem a bit sort of scant or I'm referring to my notes a lot, it's because I'm not used to doing that bit, and that's really that's research that was done before I was around. There's a copy on the TSRC, the Third Sector Research Centre website of this report, or if you want me to send it to anyone, I'm happy to do that. And that's research that David did back in 2009, 2010, basically asking these questions. He approached 7 different housing associations and undertook case studies in them, really asking what they measure in terms of social performance, why it's happening, what's prompted them to do this, and then really looking at the models that they were using and the practical issues that they were actually facing. And then the last point there, which I really like, is it worth it? So I thought I'd start just by actually what do we mean by impact? So I think it's one of those terms that is bandied around quite a lot. You know, there's lots of confusion sometimes about outputs, outcomes, etc. So I think it's helpful to see it on this continuum in that it actually goes beyond outcomes. And there's a couple of definitions sort of floating around. I think the most well-known one is the top one, which is kind of a joint definition between the OECD and NVCO, which talks about the changes that are attributable to the intervention, intended, unattended, long-term, short-term, etc. And more recently, people have tried to sort of reform that, and talking about impact being something that actually affects the root cause of the problem and actually leads to sustained growth. I've obviously been doing a lot of trawling of literature as I have to in my role, and I thought from looking at it, one of the main messages coming out is that you really are between a rock and a hard place. If you try and just measure your inputs and your outputs, then you perhaps seem to be not accountable and you're not doing enough to actually measure impact. But then if you start to measure impact, and then there's all the issues of overclaiming for what you've done and claiming your initiative's done more than it has, whereas society might have impacted on the individual. So it's really trying to balance those two issues, I feel. Returning then to the work that David undertook, he asked case studies, so 7 housing associations, of why they actually measured social performance. And obviously, as you know, one of the main external drivers was that funding, where actually our funding body wants us to do it. And to also generate the content for funding applications and monitoring evaluation reports, but also linking with partners to actually see common outcomes. And also the influence of the wider third sector in sort of taking on board the whole issue of impact measurement, and SROI is one that's measured there. Looking at the internal drivers, it was really about demonstrating impact, really trying to actually quantify the impact on that bottom line for housing associations, and really make the case that community investment isn't just a nice story, it actually really makes a difference. And then one thing that I know really surprised David when he was doing this work is actually making sure people enjoy the projects. Housing associations want to be keen to ensure that. So in selecting a toolkit, these 3 ingredients as you work came out as three of the most essential things. But you need this joined-up corporate approach, and obviously buy-in from the top is absolutely essential for that. And also this very tricky task of actually balancing the social and the financial goals, and actually measuring and reporting on those 2 very different outcomes. Also tools that work at the project level, and then the theory of change. There's a lot of research that showed that actually, although projects were being put in place, when it actually came to measuring, then the outcomes were either meant different things to different people within the organisation, or what was being delivered was slightly different to what the intended outcomes were. So it's being very clear about that whole theory of change and actually where you want to get to. The way in which the case studies were chosen was the decision as to whether to actually buy in a tool from outside or whether to actually generate your own internally. And there's 4 of them, I think, outsourced, and 3 of them develop their own in-house. And this is really just points here about actually why would you bring something in? Innovative methods, expertise, increased efficiency. Obviously, because current housing management systems might not cover what you wanted to measure within this area. And then also to if you want to do it in-house, to actually meet the specific needs of the organisation, or if you're in a group, to actually spread that practice across your group. So these are the 3 case studies that have actually developed their own systems. So we have Genesis, Circle Anglia, and Affinity Sutton. What they found is that there was very different motivations for actually choosing to develop their own system. Some were actually very centralised, some actually integrated corporate investment into a corporate team, whereas a more devolved structure was found in other instances. And that was a key influence, the context of where community investment actually sat within the organisation. So really just a few points on advantages and disadvantages of the in-house system, but just a couple of points that aren't covered on the slides that are in the report in terms of lessons learned. Again, just reiterating what I said earlier about the need for clear objectives, and also an issue of training. Training is important to clarify the purposes of the actual measurement, and also to get over this obstacle that was found within some of the case studies as people seeing it as being a detraction from the job, whereas other people saw it as actually fundamentally to actually getting the job done and helping them in that respect. And then just a couple of points about the actual system in terms of the simplicity of it and being user-friendly, and also data protection issues which need to be considered at the outset. And then we have the 4 case studies of the externally sourced systems. And again, these differ very much in their focus. IPD had, the second one down, had a very distinct purpose and focused primarily on financial returns, whereas the third and fourth one down, the lamplight and the SPRS, focused very much on individuals, sort of youth engagement and personal impacts. And obviously, because they had their own distinct purpose, they differed in terms of the focus of their work, in that obviously the lamplight and the SPRS was very much at an individual level, whereas the IPD tool was very much at the project level, as with the community impact tracking system. So again, just a few points about the advantages and disadvantages of actually bringing in an externally sourced system. In terms of the learning points there, there's obviously the issue that external tools may need to be adapted to internal needs, and need to actually consider how the data coming out of that tool would then actually link with any corporate reporting data that you have. And also the issue of affordability, the initial outlay as well as ongoing costs. More general learning points coming out of the research is that there are differences in the focus and functions of tools, and the suggestion that housing associations are likely to need a toolkit rather than just one particular tool, dependent on what they actually want to measure. And obviously the different characteristics and the range of activities that you all undertake, which essentially makes comparison and benchmarking a very difficult exercise. And the report ends with saying that the measuring of community investment activities is at an early stage of development, and not a single solution is coming out yet. So David asked the participants whether they thought, after all of this, whether it was worth it. And there was this issue of weighing up the costs and the benefits of evaluation, and a real over-optimism felt about what it actually could produce. There's a real need to be kind of limit what you expect from it. I wasn't able to gain much information on costs and staff time, and again this is something that I'll come on to, in which we put on into the HACT survey, which we know is going to be difficult to collect, but we put it in there. But then also the unanticipated benefits, so enhancing relationships with the service users and involving the users through peer research. So that covers the previous research, so that is available. It's quite a detailed report that is available, so if you are interested, that is on the TSRC website. So moving on to what we're actually doing with HACT, a questionnaire has been developed. We're aiming to get responses from about 40 organisations, and really it's looking at these areas. So whether your organisation has ever tried to measure impact, what tools you're using, are there any tools that you've actually previously used that you've now given up using, why is that? What do you measure, what level that measurement is at, and then how that data is actually used, whether it's incorporated into the KPIs of your organisation or whether it embellishes the data coming out of that already. And then lessons learned. The results from the actual telephone survey, the results from that actual survey will be put into a report which will be made available sort of beginning to the middle of December. And alongside reporting on those findings, what we hope to do is actually look at each of the tools that are being used to provide some sort of context. So look at what those tools are providing, what they're capable of providing, and the limitations of those tools as well. So I've already piloted the questionnaire on a couple of organisations, both of which are here, so thank you. So I think we'll be able to go live with it next week. We are looking for 40 organisations to take part, so if anyone here feels that they could spend 20 minutes on the phone, that would be great. I believe that John's going to send out an email, and attached to that email will be the questionnaire, so that you get an idea of what the questionnaire is actually covering, so you can give some thought to it beforehand, so it's not completely cold. But hopefully then that will give us a really good picture of actually what's happening out there, a really good starting point for people actually looking to adopt a new tool. And then just briefly introducing my research and sort of why I'm involved, where it all fits in. As I say, I'm linked through my funding to the Housing Federation, working with Terry. And really, what I'm aiming to do is develop case studies, looking at what the motivations are for housing associations to measure social impact, and what decisions are taken within their organisation to actually adopt those, and in terms of what's measured, what's not measured, and how that's integrated with existing systems. So probably starting January, February time, I will be looking for case study participants to help me with that. And then I'm also going to hopefully embellish that work with actually interviewing funders. So all these people that say they actually want the data and they can't live without it, I'm going to ask them what they use it for, and how they use it, and if they don't get that data, well, really, what happens there. And in terms of the whole funding environment, actually, where do organisations stand if they don't have this data, but also the extent, what they expect from you in terms of the scale and scope of different evaluations, dependent on the projects they're funding.